Whatever emotion holds your kids' attention will hold their life. In this video, I'm going to give you some more influence tips that will give you a better advantage in being able to help you and your children to feel better. In the last video, we covered the ability for you to see the kids' problems as separate from them, so that you're not fighting with your kids, you're fighting with the problem. And now it's time to get your children to begin letting go of personally identifying with their labels, with their emotions and with their thoughts, so that they can stop fighting with themselves and begin to move forward with their lives. But before we get into that, I'm Paul Campbell, the Mind Health Specialist, and I work with people every day helping them to change how they think and feel using advanced persuasion and influence techniques. And I'm going to be sharing some of these simple influence tips with you so that you can begin to help your kids feel better today. If you've ever noticed when one of your children is feeling low and you listen to how they use their words to describe how they're feeling in that moment, when they're right in the emotion, they mostly connect their identity to the feeling using the words, for example, I am anxious, I am worried, I am not good enough, I'm a failure, I'm depressed, I'm stupid, or I'm stressed. And this way of personally identifying with what they are experiencing can eventually develop into a crisis of identity, especially if the identity is given to them by an expert. For example, sometimes when I ask children, how do you know that you're anxious? They can normally say, well, I went to a doctor or I went to a counsellor and they said that I'm anxious. And if this label sticks, anxiety will feel more like a disability instead of a feeling. And they'll probably think that they need to get rid of it. And getting rid of anxiety would be very counterproductive on their safety. Anything your children identify with can control them, and anything your kids disidentify with, they control. If your kids identify with their emotions will control them. And when they call themselves the emotion that they are experiencing, like I'm angry, they might get into a mood and begin to identify with who they are based on that mood. And in that cycle, they can completely forget that they are so much more than just that emotion. And this can go on for days and even years. What we need to do is get them to stop identifying with the labels. So just notice what it feels like for you. Just say this statement out loud, or you can say it in your head. I am anxious. And notice what it feels like when you say it like this. Now say it this way instead, and notice what feels different. I do anxiety sometimes. What do you think the difference is for you? Now, these are the simple changes that you can begin to make inside your children. Can you imagine the difference it would make in their life if they started saying, I do anxiety sometimes, instead of saying, I am anxious? Now, I'm going to ask you another question, and I want you to notice the first answer that comes to your mind when I ask you this question. Who are you? So if somebody asked you who you were, like normally in your day-to-day routine, in work or out and about, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? If you really think about who you are. Some people mistake what they do for who they are, and they will even call themselves what they do, like I'm a doctor, or I'm an accountant, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a gambler, or I'm an alcoholic. And some people will even call themselves anxious and say, I am anxious. And of course, these are things that you can do, but never mistake what you do for who you are. And try not to let your kids mistake themselves for what they do. And don't let them mistake themselves for the mood that they're in. Because sometimes they can call themselves the mood if you really listen to them. And these are things that they do and experience. And if they keep identifying with these things, it can have a negative impact on their quality of life and the quality of life of all the people around them. Some people even think that how much they have is how much they are worth. And they will even check their bank accounts or their exam results to measure their value and say things like, I am broke, I am a failure. But as a parent, you know, and you can see the bigger picture, that you know that your kids are so much more than all of the things that they do and all of the things that they have. And it's not only important that you can see this and you know that they're so much more than all of that, it's just as important that they know this. These tips will give you a way to influence them and put things more into perspective. So let's begin to advance your influence skills and to develop a new way of thinking so that you and your kids can have the ability to change how you feel on purpose, by getting them to consider that no matter what they think they are, at any moment, they will know that they are so much more than anything that they do or anything that they have. I'm going to show you 3 concepts that you can take away from this video that will give you a positive advantage in a way that will help you and your children to change how you feel. You don't have to get them to change themselves, you just have to get them to change the story about themselves. When you change the story, you change the meaning, and when you change the meaning, you'll change the feeling. And it's not even about getting them to stop thinking, because they will never stop thinking. What you're going to do is you're going to get them to change how they are thinking. So start by getting them to stop feeding into the feeling by looking for more reasons why they're in it. When a person is in the process of a negative thought or a feeling, it's open and it's waiting for an update. There's no point in asking them why they're in the lousy mood or why they're feeling like that. Just say, okay, they're in it. What can I do to get them out of it? So instead of trying to figure out, what your intention is to change the story that they are stuck in by creating more choices and moving their attention somewhere else other than the problem. So these questions that I'm going to give you to ask them when they're in the problem is just another way of moving their attention away from the problem and moving it somewhere else that could possibly help them to feel better. So take these tips as a concept rather than a static blueprint, and always keep in mind, you're their parent, you love them, and you genuinely just want them to be happy. So in this video, I'm going to leave a link somewhere here or down below that you can listen to me helping you challenge your belief or your problem so that you can have the experience of what it feels like. So for now, I'm going to give you 3 simple examples. And if you want to experience it for yourself and you want a strategy to be able to help your children to change how they feel, then click on the link that's connected in with this video. So tip number 1, for example, if the thought process that they're stuck in is, I am anxious, you could interrupt it by saying, aren't you more than that? When you ask this simple question, they have to consider it at some level, and their mind will begin to search for an answer inside of them. And this is what you're looking for. It's always better if you do it with a question instead of just telling them, because when you ask them a question, they have to look inside themselves for the answer. If you can disassociate them in small amounts, then this is the type of process that will begin to move them away from staying stuck in the feeling. Tip number 2. So if they say that they're anxious, you could say, are you mistaken what you're feeling for who you are? This will get them to start thinking differently and begin the process of disidentifying themselves from the feeling even more. Remember what I said, anything your children identify with can control them, and anything your kids disidentify with, they control. So tip number 3, to create even more movement that will take them outside of the problem, you could also say, and above that, what's everything else in your life that's important? This will begin to tip the angle of their attention, because when you say it this way, it just unglues them from the feeling just enough as to give you some room. It's like a foot in the door. It's not the end solution, but it is the thing that starts to break the pattern and get things moving. And this can interrupt the pattern and confuse the problem just enough so that the problem can no longer be perceived in the same way. It kind of makes the problem unstable. And it doesn't work every time, because there is people out there that have many serious issues, and I'm not trying to minimize them in any way. But for me and many other people, these simple shifts in attention can make a huge impact. When you use these communication skills, sometimes it might feel like you're not getting any results or you're not getting anywhere. And you might feel like you're getting some resistance from them, from your kid or from a family member or friend, whoever you're doing it with. And it's been proven that genuine effort counts. Think of influence as a process and not an event. When you use even one of these tips, you're changing your kids' attention in small, subtle and effective ways in the long term. So just imagine every time you introduce one of these tips into your conversation with your child or somebody that you care about, you're literally tipping them in a more of a positive direction. Imagine your kid's a leaf floating down a river, and you could even be concerned that they're moving in the wrong direction. But just imagine every time you use one of these tips, you're the one that's throwing a pebble in the water. And these pebbles are creating small but effective ripples. Eventually, further down that river, they're going to notice that every little single tip made a big difference. It's all about repetition and putting some mental effort into it. And by doing it this way, you're helping them grow new pathways in their brain faster. And even if they start fighting with you, always remember, everything that you do to loosen up the problem will help them get out of that low mood quicker. And every time you use one of these tips with your kids, they will begin to notice that they don't have to stay in a low mood. They'll realize there's different ways of looking at it, and there's another way of thinking that they can use to change how they feel for themselves. And if they continue to fight with you, then all you have to say at any time is, I'm sorry you feel that way, I love you, and I'm here if you need me. And always remember, everything that you just did still counts, and they might not realize it straight away, but it's impossible for them not to think about it. So just give a little bit of time for what you did to settle in, then check in on them later and reevaluate and decide whether you should give it another shot or not. and continue to adapt this practice of updating your influence skills and making things better. So a quick recap, and then I will put a link to a video where you can experience what it's like to have your mood or your feeling or your problem challenged so that you can do it for somebody else. So a recap on the tips. Tip number 1, if the thought process that they're stuck in is I am anxious, you could interrupt it by asking them a question and saying, aren't you more than that? When you ask this simple question, they have to consider it at some level and their mind will begin searching outside of the problem for the answer. Tip number 2, they say, Mum, I'm stressed. You say, are you mistaken what you're feeling for who you are? This will give them just enough of a nudge to get them thinking differently and begin the process of disidentifying themselves from the feeling even more. Remember what I said? I'll say it again. Anything your children identify with can control them, and anything your kids disidentify with, they can control. So tip number 3, to create even more movement that will take them further outside of the problem, you could also say this: beyond or above that, what's everything else that's in your life that's important? This will begin to tip the angle of their attention, and when you say it this way, it unglues them from the feeling just enough to put things into perspective and helps them to move their attention somewhere else that could possibly make them feel better. And always remember, you can use these questions on yourself, and the same rules apply. When you're stuck in a problem, ask yourself these 3 questions and see how quick it bounces you out of the problem. So take this concept, come back to this video again if you feel that you need to, and take these new relating skills, integrate them into all of your relationships, and notice how much better you are relating to all the other people in your life. And with that said, if you found this video useful, click like, share and subscribe, and leave a positive comment if you like. If you have any questions that you want to ask me, or you want me to do a video on a specific subject, leave a message and I will make a video and put it up in one of the next videos. And I will leave a link here for a video that you can use to change how you think and feel, so that you can have this conversation with your children in a more productive way from experience. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.